Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this Efficiency for Access event in the Resilience Hub at COP26, supporting clean energy entrepreneurs. My name is Joni Coker, and I am a communications manager at CLASP, co-Secretariat of Efficiency for Access. I'll start with a high-level introduction, and I'll introduce our fantastic 5 panelists, and then we'll dive into a moderated discussion for about an hour, and we hope to have plenty of time at the end for some audience Q&A. So if you're joining us remotely, please feel free to drop questions in the chat at any time, and we'll try our best to get to them at the end. After we wrap up, all of our in-person panelists and audience members will have a chance to get to know each other and ask questions directly. So today we will be discussing the role that clean energy entrepreneurs play, and particularly local entrepreneurs play in delivering affordable, scalable, and sustainable products and services to often weak grid communities. Before the pandemic, the off-grid solar sector was paving the way for a robust clean energy transition. Over the past 10 plus years, the sector has grown into a $1.75 billion annual market, providing energy services to over 420 million people. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic triggered dramatic financial and supply chain disruptions that forced many off-grid solar companies to pause or cease operations. While the sector is showing early signs of a slow recovery, targeted support remains critical to safeguarding the industry and its vital contribution to energy access and climate resilience. A just and inclusive clean energy transition requires an understanding of the needs of local clean energy entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs and enterprises remain at the helm of the sector's recovery, and they offer the most immediate on-the-ground insights into the needs of often weak grid communities. So with that, I'll now introduce our panelists. So I'm going to start with our 2 panelists joining us remotely. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first we have Catherine Owens. Catherine Owens serves as the head of MCOPA Labs, which is a dedicated R&D business unit focused on testing and validating new assets for PAYGO financing. Prior to joining MCOPA, Catherine worked at the Environmental Defense Fund, where she shaped public policy to advance the emerging clean energy economy. Next, joining us virtually is Nimika Ikegwanu. Nimika is a farmer, agricultural radio presenter, and founder and CEO of Cold Hubs. Cold Hubs is a business that was launched in 2015 that designs, installs, and commissions 100% solar-powered walk-in cold rooms for smallholder farmers and retailers. Nimika also founded the Smallholders Foundation in 2003, which uses the Smallholder Farmers Rural Radio Network to broadcast daily agricultural management and market access information to farmers all across Nigeria. And moving on to our panelists joining us in person, we have Ben Hartley. Ben is the Principal Energy Efficiency and Cooling Specialist at Sustainable Energy for All, where he works on the Chilling Prospect Report series. His work focuses on the Cooling for All Secretariat, as well as energy efficiency in the context of SDG 7. Ben is a Canadian public policy professional with a background in energy, environment, and sustainable development. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Drew Corbin. Drew is the head of performance and investment at GOGLA, the Global Association for the Off-Grid Solar Industry. He has more than 15 years of experience working with companies, governments, donors, and NGOs to catalyze markets in the off-grid light and power sector. In his current role, Drew leads the team to strengthen GOGLA member and industry performance and improve access to finance across the sector. Welcome, Drew. And last but not least, we welcome Chris Beland. Chris has more than 6 years of experience working in the off-grid energy access sector. And as Senior Project Manager at Energy Saving Trust, Chris has led on establishing and managing the Efficiency for Access Research and Development Fund. The fund supports organizations to develop and test new technological and business model innovations in the off-grid appliances sector. All right, well, that's enough of me talking. Let's dive into the discussion. And we can turn off the PowerPoint, so hopefully we can see our virtual panelists. But yeah, Drew, I'd love to start with you. So, Gogla is widely known as the voice of the off-grid solar industry, and Gogla first started in 2012, so we're nearing, the 10-year anniversary. With that perspective in mind, I'd love to hear kind of some high-level thoughts you have on how the industry has transformed over the past 10 years.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joni. It's a pleasure to be here today at the Resilience Hub, so thank you. Yeah, 10 years. It's been a busy 10 years. Gogla was launched in 2012 with just 7 companies, mainly working in Kenya. Now we have 200 members working in more than 40 countries. We've moved from what used to be a group of vertically integrated companies that did everything from the manufacturing in China to the sales in villages into a more kind of diversified and specialized industry. So now we have companies that do hardware, software, appliances, distribution, investment of all flavors. So really we've seen the flourishing of an industry and an ecosystem that is spread really a global industry and down to the last mile in villages across Africa and Asia. And these 200 companies, they have created more than 400,000 jobs, many in rural parts of Africa as well. And Gogla, as well as having these 200 member companies, we also partner with 15 national renewable energy associations, and each of them have got many company members, locally owned companies. So I don't know the exact figure, but there's hundreds of companies working in the off-grid solar sector. If we look at the product mix, so 10 years ago it started with the entry-level solar light. It's providing kind of task lighting for kids to study, for people to cook on, kind of a basic entry-level light. Really impactful, really nice, but quite limited, if you like, in what people can do with it. And what we've seen is really a trend towards larger solar home systems. So they're now used for lighting, phone charging, radios, TVs, even fridges in the home, as well as on-farm for water pumping, agro-processing, and for entrepreneurs in powering livelihoods and business opportunities. At the same time, to enable this growth in product size and cost, we've had the pay-as-you-go kind of technology that's come in and powered all of this. So customers can pay a down payment on the system, and they pay the product off over a period of 12 to 36 months, say. And this has really enhanced the affordability of off-grid solar for a lot of people. It's also kind of enabled a whole digital revolution as well. So people are using mobile money, they pay off their system, they get a digital credit profile, and with this they're getting health insurance products, they're getting business loans, school loans. So you find that off-grid solar products, they're a platform for energy services, but also financial inclusion and other kind of elements that are boosting their resilience. But finally, I think the most significant thing in the last 10 years is kind of this revolution that's spread out in homes and villages across rural parts of the developing world. Previously there was relying on kerosene and dirty fuels. They now have modern electricity for lighting, phone charging. So they really entered kind of the modern world and are more connected. I've got better education, health, income opportunities. So, there's 420 million people now have access to off-grid solar products. The majority of these still with just lighting and phone charging. But what we've created is the kind of the foundation, to move people up the energy ladder and, create all of this social impact and boosting resilience as well. So there remains many barriers to serve the 700 million people that are still without electricity. I think we're going to talk a bit about those barriers later. But I think we've demonstrated a technology, a business model, and an investment case that works. And it's some of the companies we'll be hearing from later, MCOPA and Cold Hubs. They've got fantastic stories to tell about how they've achieved this impact and built a foundation that is really an opportunity to, to serve 700 million people and, bring economic development for some of the most climate vulnerable parts of the world. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. That was a great kind of summation. It's really clear there's been substantial transformation across the industry, whether it's from there being a larger, more diverse mix of products to different financing options that are now available to consumers like PayGo. And that's actually a perfect segue to us for us to hear from our two industry representatives on the panel. So Catherine and Nimika, as our two industry reps, it would be wonderful to hear how you first got started in the sector and what kinds of support mechanisms were most helpful in launching, in your case, Nimika, for cold hubs, or building your companies, in your case, Catherine. How about we start with Nimika?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me and the question. I transitioned from being an agricultural radio broadcaster to running cold hubs, basically because we were trying to tackle the challenge of food spoilage due to lack of cold storage in a country where there is unreliable energy supply. So we saw the challenge and we decided to innovate a solar-powered walk-in cold room that can be installed in the middle of the farm cluster at a produce aggregation hub or an outdoor food market. And the most difficult time in setting up the venture, which we founded in 2015, was really raising financing to deploy the first pilot cold storages. It was really difficult to raise financing, but we finally were able to raise financing. And even prior to raising the financing to launch was really how to raise finance to actually deploy a research and development unit, an R&D unit, because we designed a solar-powered walk-in cold room and we wanted to have a prototype out and then use the result of that prototype test to expand the deployment. Yeah, and secondly was really attracting and retaining talent. We found it really difficult to attract and retain talent. But we were able to, surmount so many of these challenges because we spent time identifying the right partners. Several international development agencies actually came to our support with little financing. Because of the little financing we had, we were poised to prove beyond every reasonable doubt that we were the right team that can deploy 100% solar-powered walk-in cold storage. So with this little financing, we were able to create incredible impact, because we had deep knowledge of the local environment, spoke the language of the people, knew where and how to deploy, when to deploy, and what to do once we deploy. And we were able to, involve so many local people who came to work in the company with very low salaries, with the belief that what we are trying to tackle, we eventually become a big company that we pay higher salaries, So a deep understanding of the local environment, having strong partners, and also having people who were able to help launch a company, the technology and the business service that we were deploying was very helpful through the early days of cold hubs. Yeah.
Thank you, Nimika. You're kind of touching on something that we're going to build out further as we move on in the questions, the importance of really knowing the local environment and people and their needs. So we look forward to hearing more about that. Catherine, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Joni. You'll have to excuse me, I'm muscling through a really bad cold. Thanks for the warm introduction and the opportunity to speak. Just for clarity, I can't say that I'm an entrepreneur yet. I hope to be one day. But I joined MCOPA a little over 4 years ago, and actually MCOPA is one of those 7 companies that Drew mentioned earlier. That was like the first cohort of pioneers into pay-as-you-go solar. So we came to market, just about 10 years ago. We made our first sale in 2011, and we, a very congratulatory moment. Last year, we celebrated reaching our 1 millionth customer milestone, which was something we really celebrated, especially when the company was still working very remotely. But I think that the story of M-Copa is very similar to like many of the companies that came to market around that time. And it was coming to market with a product that had never really been seen, had been seen by customers, had been seen. There are no competitors that we could lean on. And so actually, much like the other kind of all the competitors at the time, we really leaned on grant support to really kind of prove out not just the product R&D, but in many respects, the entire pay-as-you-go business model to many early investors. And so those grant funders that came in, and I remember SDDO played a really pivotal role in this by giving us the initial grant to kind of get the founders up and going and kind of prove what pay-as-you-go really could be. It really de-risked it for those early, those seed investors that eventually came into the market, and much like those grant funders saw the climate potential and saw the socioeconomic potential that pay-as-you-go solar could have as we displace kerosene lanterns and customers' rural homes with solar lightings. So, again, those grant funds kind of gave the initial fuel to put into the engine. And once there were some early successes, the story began to just unfold itself. And those grants kind of continued to come in so that we could iterate on the product. So we could go from that beta version then to the first gen product, to the second gen product. And that's when all of a sudden you started to see kind of this mushroom effect, and it started to scale upward. And so then you began to see early interest from impact investors like Generation, from UK CDC, began to also see the business case and begin to start to understand the investment thesis. And that really enabled them to come in. And I would say too, I mean, even 10 years later, it's so great. The entire industry has all of a sudden seen all these different types of capital come in. I think early on, very much, grant, and then it led to equity. And then we've seen kind of as the sector began to mature, you actually began to see debt funders come in and be able to unlock working capital, which is so fundamental for the pay-as-you-go business model. And that really is kind of like the fuel that you have to put in to the engine to keep it going and to be able to continue scaling up and servicing more companies. And I think it only continues to move in the right direction. I mean, obviously, I know Drew will speak to this. We did see some setbacks with COVID, but I think there is still the sector as a whole is still so ripe for investment and to continue to see the scale, especially as we continue to bring more modern energy services to customers.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, it's really great to get that perspective of, back when small grants were, used to prove the pay-as-you-go business model as a successful mechanism, because now it's kind of a staple across the industry. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I have a question for all of our panelists. And Nimika, you touched on this already, so maybe we can start with you. In what ways are local entrepreneurs well positioned to speed up the transition to clean energy economies and address the needs of often weak grid communities? It would be wonderful if you each could give maybe an example or two from your areas of expertise. So, Nimika, if you could kick us off, and then we'll move on to Chris and Ben.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Local entrepreneurs are really key in, driving the whole process moving forward. In 2015, we founded Code Hubs as a company that designs, builds, commissions, operates, and also maintains solar-powered working code rooms. And what we are trying to solve was the problem of food spoilage due to lack of cold storage at key points along the food supply chain. And as a local entrepreneur, we developed a very robust technology that was fit for the Nigerian environment. In 2015, we deployed 5 code hubs. At the moment, we are running 54 code rooms, all still 100% solar powered. We've transitioned from our first generation code hub to a second generation code hub generously funded by Energy Saving Trust, and we are now deploying the first few units. By the end of the 2022, we should have close to 154 code hubs because we are planning to deploy more code hubs next year. So as a local entrepreneur, we have used our solar-powered cold storage to save more than 50,000 tons of food from spoilage. This is food typically thrown away by smallholder farmers, retailers, and wholesalers because they don't have access to cold storage at all. We are serving about 7,500 smallholder farmer retailers and wholesalers, and they've increased their income from previous $60 every month to a minimum of $120 every month at the moment. And we've created more than 66 new jobs for women by hiring and training them to work as our cold hub operators and market attendants. More than 1 million kilograms of CO2 has been saved by using completely solar energy and running our cold rooms completely. And all these results were derived because we understood the uniqueness of the local environment. We spoke the language of the people. We understood the terrain. We knew where to go, when to go, how to go, and what to do when we get there, And we were Nigerians, so most of the farmers were able to adopt the technology and service because we were Nigerians and we spoke the language that they understood. So local entrepreneurs are key elements in driving adoption, promoting clean technology all across the world. And this is what we have witnessed in Nigeria and something that we'll keep on advocating for. Yeah.
Thanks, Nimika. And actually, it's perfect that you mentioned, the Efficiency for Access R&D Fund 2 and enabling, Generation 2 of the Cold Hubs unit. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thanks, Janie. And hi, everyone. So, the Energy Saving Trust manages the Efficiency for Access Research and Development Fund. And so we help support organizations to develop technology solutions, but also looking at testing new business models as well. And so with funding from IKEA Foundation and FCDO and UKAID, we're supporting a number of organizations across Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And of those kind of the larger portfolio, we're supporting around about 11 organizations that are kind of truly locally owned, I guess you could call it, and in country, with over, I think it's around 1.5 million pounds worth of funding. And really, those organizations, they really know the local kind of context, obviously, I guess, but it goes without saying, they know that they have that deep market knowledge and know that kind of the local context so well. They know the ecosystem. They know the kind of key players. They know the market generally very well. And I guess the point around, sorry, I think the point around kind of, sorry. Just basically they know the market really well, and the organizations are just really well placed. And so an example under the R&D fund in Kenya is Adili Solar Hubs. I wanted to highlight them. They're working with the local community around Lake Turkana. They know it's an example of kind of knowing the end users and the challenges they're facing on a day-to-day basis. And so they're helping the communities around Lake Turkana to improve their incomes, and providing access to new kind of to new markets as well, and working across the kind of the whole fish value chain really. Just that the organizations we're working with under the R&D fund are just really well placed and provide kind of access to the kind of the wider networks in country, and just really know the context. And I think the point that what Nemeka kind of highlighted is exactly kind of what I want to get to, in terms of knowing that context, and he's kind of gone through that in great detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And And Ben, over to you. Do you have anything to add about, how local entrepreneurship can help speed up the clean energy transition?
Yeah, just to say first, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here on Energy Day. SE for All, for those of you who don't know, is an organization founded first under the auspices of the UN and later separated from it, but remaining associated with it to accelerate the speed and scale at which we achieve SDG 7. Our CEO also serves as the special representative of the Secretary General for Sustainable Energy, and is here this week in that role as co-chair of UNA Energy and as the co-chair of the COP26 Energy Transition Council. And I think that's sort of what I want to touch on. Is we started thinking about SDG 7 and energy as being this golden thread that helps achieve all of these other SDGs. And here at this COP, I think we're also understanding that SDG 7 and meeting it by 2030 is a vital milestone on the path to a net zero economy. There's no way that we're going to be able to achieve our climate goals unless we achieve SDG 7, a large part of which relies on distributed renewables and local entrepreneurship. To the question as to why are local entrepreneurs best positioned, I mean, personally, I think it's very evident that they are the best first responders, either to an issue that they see or a crisis that happens. And I think we saw a lot of that with COVID, and that's the example that I'll draw on. We at SE for All, we recently had a SE for All Youth Summit. And again, youth being good, important drivers of entrepreneurship themselves. We had an SE for All Youth Summit that featured an innovation contest. And many of the innovations that were submitted in this contest were related to distributed renewable energy. And they were looking at things like, how do we repurpose the sort of off-grid solar refrigeration that we've been using for agriculture for vaccines, right? And these are young people that are thinking that they can do this and they can respond, and they're responding to these issues that they see in front of them. So I think that's sort of the way I'd answer that question. I hope that's helpful, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I thought it was, your point about SDG 7 being the linchpin to the success of so many of the other goals is really, really, it's a great point. It's very true. I'll hand it over to Drew. Yeah, anything else to add?
I agree with what my colleagues on the panel have said. Maybe just to add, the off-grid solar market has been established and is maturing in just a handful of countries. There's many places where the market is really nascent. And you get some of the international companies. Look at places like Burundi, Benin, some of the smaller countries where there's difficult economies, and it's hard for them to make the move. It's a big risk. It's expensive, and you're finding it's the development isn't happening there. So I think if we're going to make achieve universal access, move to those countries that are smaller, harder to reach. I think locally owned companies are really well placed to do that. Going into new countries, but also going to the last mile in some of the more established countries, and finding the most remote, the most vulnerable people. I think locally owned companies there have got a niche that they can add value and be really complementary to the to some of the bigger players in the market.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Ben, I'd love to hop back to you. If you could speak to, what kind of efforts or mechanisms have helped foster local entrepreneurship in the off-grid solar sector to date? What can you tell us a little bit about the scaffolding that needs to be in place for local entrepreneurship to thrive?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of what efforts have worked, I mean, obviously we hear, I guess they're sort of buzzwords, right? Like policy and regulatory frameworks, business model and financial model innovation. I think, for me as well, it's underlying that is this need to build capacity in a way that we can implement all of this. That's sort of the key to sort of the lasting framework. I think the other issue is removing fossil fuel subsidies to ensure that there's a level playing field. I think that's pretty important as well. And I think the example I would give as well is, in Nigeria, the solar home system program, 5 million solar homes, the World Bank and the REA are offering a subsidy per connection, and I think that's sort of a good example. In terms of scaffolding, I'll just sort of, I think, removing fossil fuel subsidies is really important. An equal playing field is vital, right? I think I want to make sure I get this right. I think it's also more of the same. What we've been able to do, we haven't been able to scale. And then I think, we need to stop thinking about distributed renewable energy as a stopgap, but rather as an end goal. And that sort of also ties back to what I meant in terms of this energy transition. We're starting to see, goals of net zero come through in places where there are energy access gaps. Like Nigeria recently committed to 2060. And so, in that context, I think we can start thinking about this as not as a stopgap, but as a final solution. And then the last point I just wanted to make is, linking. I think the scaffolding is thinking about distributed renewables for productive use, not just electricity to turn on a light, but electricity to power business and to power school. And so I think, that shift in mindset is an important piece of scaffolding that we need to, really, I think, internalize a little bit more. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Your point about, removing fossil fuel subsidies, that's something, you don't hear a lot when people talk about the energy transition. You don't hear of that as being an issue, but it's a great point. All right. So going back to you, Chris, in your role as the manager of the Efficiency for Access Research and Development Fund, what are some of the most promising innovations you've seen emerge from the entrepreneurs that you've been working with?
Yeah, thanks, Joni. I think first to say that there's obviously we're supporting many innovations that can encourage sectoral growth. And I guess we can break it down into sort of technology and business model innovations, and they're both, really important and enabling kind of, affordability is the kind of key thing I think with a lot of appliances. And within kind of technology, we're looking at kind of hardware and software. And software is often overlooked, but it's actually a really important kind of piece of the puzzle. It can enable those business model innovations. It can help organizations or companies kind of manage their portfolio and the kind of with the customers. So it's a really kind of important aspect. But within kind of the more hardware kind of, the kind of traditional productive use appliances, access to cooling within the R&D fund is quite a large kind of component. And we're seeing kind of, alternative approaches to kind of small scale refrigeration, alternative approaches to cooling within small scale refrigeration, and kind of thinking about how that's going to be kind of locally appropriate as well. And then walk-in cold rooms is obviously Cold Hubs is on the panel, Nemeka, and that's a kind of different level, I'd say, operating at a different level, and does serve a different purpose as well. But that's a really, walk-in cold rooms are really key at strengthening food systems. And then kind of beyond cooling, we're seeing kind of productive use, income-generating appliances. So solar-powered egg incubators. We're seeing a lot of traction with that kind of from the project we're supporting with OVO Solar. But solar milling is kind of another kind of key aspect within the R&D fund, and one we're supporting partners to try and crack really. And then really kind of a new area as well within the R&D fund more recently is kind of affordable e-mobility. And so we're working with a couple of companies in helping them to realize that kind of, bringing down the cost of moto taxis, electric bikes, and three-wheelers. Yeah, that's kind of what I'd summarize kind of the innovations that we're supporting.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, going back to what Drew mentioned about the diversity in product mix, the fact that, you're dealing with everything from egg incubators to e-mobility to walk-in cold rooms, it's really great to see all of the kind of products that are now, at least in the R&D phase. So I believe Catherine is back with us. So since we are, physically here at COP26, I think it's really important that we touch on the energy access and the off-grid solar industry's touch points with climate resilience. When we think about the impacts of the a thriving off-grid solar sector, the talking points we most often hear are, lives reached and people advancing up the energy ladder, and the off-grid solar industry's really substantial impact on advancing climate resilience is something that's touched on less frequently. Catherine, I know that MCOPA does a lot of work to measure, your impact on the climate. So I'd love to hear, how you measure your impact at MCOPA, and also, how is the PAYGO model, how have you seen it amplify your impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at MCOPA, we really think about, what is the impact we want to generate for customers? And we very much kind of have this thesis that we want to help customers be healthier, more prosperous, green, and feel connected to the wider world. And especially in the context of, displacing kerosene lanterns for solar energy, it is very much, I think sometimes just talks about the number of lives reached, the number of appliances that are in customers' homes. But I think the most obvious kind of metric that also comes to mind is the metric tons of avoided carbon emissions that go into our climate. So MCOPA, again, we've reached about 1.4 million homes with solar energy. All told, over those 10 years, our customers have helped negate about 2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide going into our atmosphere. And just to put that number into perspective, that's the equivalent of turning a U.S. coal-fired power plant offline for half a year. So these little kerosene lanterns stacked up in magnitude, they do create a meaningful impact in helping safeguard our planet. But, when we think about, what impact means for our customers, saving our planet doesn't come top of mind for them, right? Because they're not the ones that have been polluting buckets and turning on power plants for years and years, right? So what matters to them, and particularly when I think about how resilience, what that means to them, resilience for them means being able to break a cycle of perpetually being dependent on fossil fuels and having to pay for really poor form, hazardous kerosene lanterns that cause indoor air pollution, that are causing household fires, that are causing their children to have teary eyes and to have burns from touching open flames in their home. And resilience for our customers also means that by having a solar-powered TV in their home, they now have access to critical information, such as being warned and can prepare for things like droughts, because most of our customers are in fact farmers, whether they're subsistence farmers or they're farmers for income. It also means that they're able to, by displacing all that consumptive spending on kerosene for those lanterns and channel it towards an asset such as solar, which they can pay off after a year, 2 years times, they're now actually increasing their household budgets so that in times of those economic shocks, they can maybe potentially shoulder through those turbulent times. But I think what's also really important about the PAYGO model, because obviously once customers pay off that first loan for their solar system or for their smartphone even, they can unlock a wide menu of other information and digital financial services that were previously not within reach for our customers. So it's really phenomenal to see, even over the time of COVID, we sold about 20,000 health insurance products to our customers who wanted and needed that social safety net in case they were sick from COVID and needed some support. It also means that we can unlock insurance for their fields, for their yields and their agricultural harvest in case there's a low harvest one year. So when I think about resilience, yes, I think it's really important to talk about the carbon avoidance, but at a customer level, it's so much more immediate and visceral, and it really does come down to feeling healthier by taking kerosene out of the homes. It comes from being financially prepared by putting kind of consumptive spending towards investment, and it comes down to feeling connected and prepared from an information standpoint, so they can safeguard against droughts or locust infestations, or having health insurance in times of a pandemic.
Yeah, that was really well said, Catherine. Thank you. It's right. The the people, the end users, intended for these products are not the ones causing climate change, but they're the ones with the potential to, have substantial quality of life benefits from access to these products. So, yeah, thank you. All right. Just keeping an eye on the clock. I think we have time for a couple more questions, but Drew, I'd love to hand it back to you. So it is well known at this point that the off-grid solar industry was hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the same time, while some companies were forced to pause or end operations, others, held steady or thrived. Can you speak to kind of your observations or any takeaways that you've had from the perspective of Gogla? And also, what kind of support mechanisms has Gogla offered to its membership to get them through this?
Yeah, thanks, Joni. No surprises. It's been a tough time the last 18 months for many companies and customers in the off-grid solar industry. But for me, it's more a story of resilience, actually. Maybe in terms of the difficulties that companies have faced. So, yes, sales have been down. We've seen that some of the pay-go default rates have also increased. So, there's people as their livelihoods are hurt, their incomes are hurt. That translates into lower sales. People not being able to pay for their systems, and of course, terrible for them that they lose the opportunity and the impact that comes with that. It's not been as drastic as many had feared when this all kicked off March last year, and in fact, in some cases, we've seen that some customers have been actually paying and using their systems more. So we see that as lockdowns roll out, people are at home, they're relying on their systems for mobile phones, TVs to get access to information, homeschooling for kids. Customers value these systems and kind of the fundamental energy services more than ever. Yeah, I think there's an interesting and positive story there about the connection between people and the energy services that they need, particularly in a time of crisis. Secondly, some of the investment that's coming in the industry, we've seen similar volumes of investment in 2019, 2020, and 2021. So there's really been kind of solidarity in the industry between investors and the companies. They recognize that times are tough. They've been restructuring deals and also continuing with the pipeline. I remember one investor said to me, the off-grid solar companies are still standing. The optimism around off-grid solar still stands. So, I think the people were a bit spooked at the start, but, there's general positivity that, that the sector is resilient and can be a good bet for the future. And finally, I'd say, looking at governments, the many governments were quick to act and designate off-grid solar companies as essential service providers. So that enabled them to continue their operations and continue serving customers who are, obviously, using and benefiting from these products. So, yes, it's been a tough time. Yes, some customers have lost out, but on the whole, the industry has remained resilient, and I think the companies, the investors, the customers, they keep faith, and we're looking forwards to the recovery. For sure, we're not out of the woods yet. It's still a stretch for companies. But yeah, looking forward to the future. In terms of what Gogla has supported on, we've worked with a couple of the relief and recovery funds, and trying to link these investors with companies. We're still holding events and trying to bring the industry together, to learn, to share, to network and match. And we've also been trying to keep our finger on the pulse with surveys, consultations, and kind of sending out signals to the market as to where companies are at and what is needed to navigate through these stormy waters.
Yeah, that's great, Drew. I mean, you're right. There's so much nuance into how different companies experienced the past year and a half. So yeah, it's excellent that Gogla is kind of putting its finger on the pulse and seeing what they actually need to recover.
Yeah, maybe that's an interesting point to add. Joni, the impacts have been very diverse. We've seen that certain countries that have been in lockdown have have had harder times. You know, I think smaller companies have struggled more than bigger companies. You know, maybe some business models have found it harder than others as well. So, you know, there's lots of nuance in there, and it's difficult to capture it all. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. So Ben, I'm going to turn it back to you. You know, again, since we're gathered here at COP, I feel it's important to touch on the government and policy aspects of the off-grid solar industry. And, you know, in particular, it'd be great if you could tell us, you know, what kind of action should governments be making at the policy level to support the off-grid solar industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's ensuring that ensuring that the off-grid solar sector and the off-grid solar market and the plans for it are aligned with net zero. I think, you know, integrated energy planning that includes, you know, geospatial analysis, also a hugely important measure that governments can take, you know, as well as I think efforts to build and maintain supply chains would be, I think, key things that governments can do, because often, you know, the supply chains is a key issue that prevents a lot of this or is holding this back a little bit in some countries. You know, given that we're a COP, I would probably also note a couple things on the international side, which is maybe a little bit, you know, how to say it, maybe a little bit out of scope, but I think it's interesting, is one of the issues that we're here to talk about, or that's being negotiated at this COP, is this issue of carbon credits, or how we understand carbon crediting, and how we agree on what benefit is gained from a carbon credit. And when we talk about, you know, being able to offset the equivalent of half a year's worth of a U.S. coal facility through distributed renewables, that if we can agree on Article 6, we can hopefully get to a place where these types of investments in distributed renewable energy and off-grid solar actually gain those outcomes. Right? You gain those mitigation outcomes in a sort of formal way against the Paris Agreement. So I think that's an issue that's coming a few years down the line. I don't know if we're going to get there this year, but I think it's something that, you know, along with, you know, the price of putting a price on carbon and all that, I think it's an interesting thing for us to keep our eyes on over the horizon, and I think maybe isn't something that we talk about a lot in these types of forums. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. You're raising a lot of novel concepts with the fossil fuel subsidies, and then how carbon credits will impact the industry. So yeah, that'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds. All right, so I know we're running out of time, but I just have one last question for everyone. In one sentence, what kinds of support mechanisms do you think will be the most influential in getting the sector back on track towards achieving SDG 7? It'd be great, Nimika, if we could start with you.
For me, in one sentence, I think we need large ticket financing, you know, to get sustainable energy achieved. Yeah.
Thanks. And over to you, Catherine.
Sure. If I could channel my CFO right now, I think it definitely would be helping some of the PAYGO companies. I mean, obviously, it is a credit model, so being able to unlock local currency working capital funds, I think would be kind of like certainly not a silver bullet for the sector, but certainly a leg up in really being able to continue to serve customers and be able to on-lend that credit for them to access solar assets.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Catherine. And we can just go down the line.
Yeah, for me, on Monday here at a COP, we heard the announcement of this Global Energy Alliance for People and Planets. There was $1.5 billion from three of the biggest philanthropies in the world, and commitments of $10 billion from some of the DFIs and MDBs for energy access, for decentralized renewable energy. You know, this is unprecedented in terms of the philanthropic funds and the kind of the money that's on the table, which, you know, household solar, productive use, mini grids, you know, we need to keep an eye on this and make sure that we're going to help these philanthropies spend it wisely for some of the people that need it the most.
So I would say we need a package of kind of support mechanisms, thinking about kind of local entrepreneurs. What they're missing is really kind of that pathway from kind of that early stage innovation through to kind of commercializing it. And so grant funding is a key element of that. And in the R&D fund, we've seen the kind of impact from the grant support we can provide. I think what's missing from a fund perspective is the kind of follow-on kind of early stage investment capital that has that high risk tolerance. I think that's what's really needed to kind of bring those products and scale the products.
And I'll just say more productive use mechanisms, and I guess what I would describe as pro sort of base of the pyramid innovation mechanisms in that strive to make productive use technologies more affordable.
That's great. Thank you all. And I just want to open the floor to any audience questions. As a reminder, if you're joining us remotely, please don't hesitate to submit a question in the chat. But in the meantime, does anybody here in person have a question for our panelists? Yes, over to you. We're going to get you a microphone.
Hello, can you hear me? No? Okay. Thank you for that really interesting insight into everything that's going on with the programs. You talked about the last 10 years being a digital revolution. I'd just like to hear what your predictions are for the next 10 years, what you think might happen. It'd be great to hear from all of the panel on that.
Yeah, great question. I'm an optimist, so we have the 2030 target of universal access to energy. With this $10 billion from the Global Energy Alliance for People on the Planet, I think if that is well spent, we can make serious inroads into the 700 million people that don't have access to electricity. So I see more people gaining access to electricity, more people gaining access to mobile phones, TVs, enabling these kind of digital lives, more companies flourishing, and kind of the economic growth and the climate goals that come from that. That's the ideal.
Maybe I can go because I would have answered in a very similar way, and maybe just to add a point that in achieving that, we show why clean power, be it grid or off-grid, is the most attractive option, and that in turn enables us to decide to go off coal earlier or be able to displace things like diesel and stuff like that. So it's those. I think I would say yes, and then that leads to this other good outcome that I really hope to see over the next 10 years as well.
Yeah, can I chime in there, Joni?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I wonder, Nimika or Catherine, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm with you, Trevor. I'm an optimist. I think what you'll definitely see is wherever you don't see PAYGO solar present on a map today, I think in 10 years' time, you'll definitely see that coverage, right? I think even if you look at, kind of like the birth of M-Pesa, which was the first mobile money platform or service that came out, I think now it's the idea of like peer-to-peer payments through your mobile app is, 46 countries with M-Pesa alone, but you think about the Venmos and all these other products that are worldwide. I think you'll begin to continue to see this proliferation. But I think more excitingly, I think what you'll see is, and again, I come at from the perspective of MCOPA, we started 10 years ago with pay-as-you-go lighting, that became pay-as-you-go TVs, pay-as-you-go refrigerators. Last year, we introduced pay-as-you-go smartphones. We sold 200,000 smartphones in our first year during COVID, no less. And I think what you begin to see is this application of this financing platform that really is bringing down affordability for so many products that were previously out of reach. And I think And Chris touched upon it earlier, but it's, to me, e-mobility is a really exciting space to begin moving into and thinking like, okay, you know, we displace kerosene for solar. Could we displace petrol motorbikes for electric motorbikes? And I think that's really going to be, everyone's going to be keeping their eye on that space, because in 10 years' time, you could see a lot more electric bikes on the road.
Thanks, Catherine. Nimika, did you have anything to add? Otherwise, we can see if anybody else in the audience has a question. Oh, Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, just very quickly, I guess. Just bridging that affordability gap, I think, speaking from an off-grid appliances perspective, that's going to be the real challenge, kind of going, you know, in the next 10 years up to 2030. But if, you know, through the different innovations, both technological and business model innovations, can help access to those new appliances that can further increase incomes, I think that's going to be the real challenge. So kind of bridging that affordability gap.
Yeah, I just want to add that, you know, in the next 10 years, I see more role to be played by local entrepreneurs. I think the whole innovation, creativity within the space will be driven by local entrepreneurs and local companies. I see more digitalized, productive use infrastructure, real infrastructure for productive use. But I see that the trajectory of growth is really prioritizing local innovations driven by local actors.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Nimika. It sounds like, yeah, local entrepreneurship and local enterprises are really going to be at the heart of the market's growth, which is, you know, as it should be. Does anybody else have any other questions from the audience? Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you all very much. Extremely interesting. You all talked about the very wide benefits that come from these projects. They're way beyond saving energy and cutting carbon emissions. What needs to change for those benefits to be recognised more widely and impact on the decisions that are being made about funding these projects?
Should I go first? I may fail. I guess, and Gogler is working on this, you know, in terms of developing an impact framework. I think that's capturing those, the kind of beyond kind of the impacts that you mentioned. You know, I think that developing a kind of comprehensive framework that can capture those impacts is obviously a very positive thing, but also has a kind of wider benefit as well, in that, you know, kind of from an investor perspective, they're looking for those as well. It's not just, you know, especially looking at impact investors, I think that's kind of, they're looking for those additional benefits as well that can be captured, you know, in a successful kind of impact framework.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think maybe we're already seeing that something has changed with the Global Alliance for People and Planet. That fund, the 10 billion that's in that fund, has a pretty significant focus on distributed renewables over, I think, a lot of what we've seen previously. And philanthropic capital is something that can really help catalyze a bigger, a larger market development than than the actual dollar figure that it has. So I think there's some of that, and then so I think that's actually a big step forward. We're not going to really see what the outcomes are for a few years. It's going to take a little while for the funds to move, but that's a pretty big deal. Alternatively, like in addition, I think, you know, showing at a more sort of granular level, and again, we'll have to prove this through the economic recovery, is just how, you know, distributed renewable energy can support economic growth that goes above business as usual, because that's the fundamental here, right? Is we need to show why this is better than the alternative. And, you know, I think we're probably going to see some stories out of, you know, what we've learned in the last 18 months that will hopefully start to accelerate that a little bit. So I think for me, it's those two things, but I defer to my colleague.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. To date, the industry has secured about $2 billion over the last decade. And I'd say that the primary motivation for a lot of these investors is, in fact, the social impact. I think to grow and I fully realize the opportunity in this sector, we need to find new sources of capital and kind of new that are motivated by different means. And what we see here at COP, of course, climate finance is the order of the day. So I think off-grid solar needs to be better at positioning itself in the climate agenda. So we've heard a bit about the carbon mitigations that are here, and it being not net zero compatible for places like Nigeria, but also it's about the adaptation and resilience. How these technologies enable people to boost their resilience and adapt to climate change. So we're working to kind of build this narrative with fantastic cases like Catherine was talking about, how people's digital lives gives them access to financial products, insurance, smartphones, and all these things. So I think for us it's about telling the story and kind of creating this framework and evidence base that we can then take to climate first investors and say, look, this is a really strong investment for climate action.
I just want to jump in that, real quickly, that for us to realize these, I think there has to be a significant shift from the way funding is being distributed at the moment, the way funding is being channeled to innovation and projects at the moment, to prioritize local companies and SMEs. And I think that is what is going to make so many of these actions really sustainable. When I spoke last, I talked about the need for large ticket financing to be channeled through local entrepreneurs. And I think that is what is going to really make the difference. There is already a lot of money out there, but what is missing is that local companies and entrepreneurs have not been prioritized. There has always been small grants that for R&D, to prototype, to test, and after that, a little bit of impact investment, But we also have seen that so many of the larger scale off-grid companies have raised a lot of money to come into different markets, these developing markets where we all play. And I think there has to be a change in that financing that goes to those large-scale companies to be directed to local entrepreneurs. Unless this is done, achieving and realizing sustainable energy will only be a mirage. Thank you.
Catherine, any final thoughts?
I guess my one thought, kind of going back to the question, is I think so much of kind of like the impact to date we've only begun to really measure what happens at the household level, what happens at the customer level. And I think for me, like the next change that, I'd love to see, like in kind of marrying it with another question we heard earlier, is 10-year time, is you could have a lot more richness around kind of the stories that come out of how these technologies are coming, improving customers' lives. And ultimately, one is actually policy changes. I really think about actually how does the entire system need to change such that we can actually bring a lot of these technologies to market to scale much faster, much more easily. And I hope that there even be some like really experimental financial mechanisms, like we already have carbon finance right now, which is very much a hot topic. But could there somehow be like an extra like premium pricing for that carbon? I know this does exist, but could there somehow be like an impact credit that came along for companies actually to potentially continue to support these kind of innovations and these initiatives that impact customers at the household level?
Thanks, Catherine. Well, that is a great kind of message to wrap us up, and those are some wonderful questions. We're at time, but thank you to everyone who attended here in person and virtually, and a huge thank you to our 5 panelists and our 2 joining us remotely, whatever time it is where you are. I wish everybody a great rest of your day. Bye.